right. Good evening, everyone. Hope everyone is doing well. Got a couple folks in the chat already, hopefully. Here we go. Hey, Wayfork Woodworks is hosting us. Awesome. Thank you, sir. So, welcome everybody to another episode of the Good Grognards. Oh, we're getting audio feedback. Hang on. To another episode of the Good Grognards. I am Fan Gibson.
And I'm Derek White.
And we're the Good Grognards.
Woo-hoo!
And tonight, we've got several things to talk about. We're going to continue our discussion from a couple of weeks ago about what do we do when D&D doesn't meet our needs. And tonight, we're going to talk about what do we do when D&D does not meet our fantasy needs. Maybe you've got a different style of what fantasy is, and we can talk about how you can fix that. So we'll get into that in a minute. But first up, as always, we talk about Grognards Doing Good. And this is our segment where we talk about not just Grognards, not just those crotchety old folks, but anyone in the gaming community, honestly, that is doing good work, charitable, artistic, whatever. We want to spotlight those folks. So first up, real quickly, just want to give everyone an update. We've been talking about the Pickled Dragon GoFundMe for the month of July, specifically the sale that helped support that. If you haven't been following us to hear this story, Matt Rauscher, who is a good friend of the podcast and also a Gary Con regular game designer, all-around good guy, was paralyzed from the chest down in 2019 and needs to get into a better living situation that has some better accessibility and climate for him. And so there's a GoFundMe there that has already raised, last we checked, around just under $10,000. That's about half of what Matt needs. So please go continue to support him. We're promoting Adventures in 3D, who all of July was giving proceeds from anyone who used a special discount code to those proceeds would go to Matt. That, I believe, has ended, but please do go support Adventures in 3D at their Etsy shop because they do really good work, and they took the time and the money to support Matt with this, but also go support Matt as well. Second up, Derek, do you want to talk about our next one?
Child's Play. Child's Play is a charity that seeks to improve the lives of children and teens in pediatric hospitals and other child welfare facilities through the kindness and generosity of the gamer community and the power of play, the healing power of play. They support 180 children's hospitals around the world in their network through Amazon wish lists and annual monetary gifts. They have visited and spoken with the child life staff at over 100 hospitals in the past 4 years to learn how they use games and technology to help children during their play. And they have also funded 17 game tech positions whose job is to help the child life department at a hospital manage the video game equipment. And if you've ever dealt with video game equipment, you know how difficult that can be.
Yeah.
They research different games for the children to play, which is essential. And they play games with the patients during their stay. How awesome is that their job is to play games with the patients? They have also supported nearly 200 domestic violence shelters, which is really great for families who are in a very, very difficult place. And they have a grant that any nonprofit children's facility can apply to for support. So it's not just about them. They're also helping other nonprofit children's facilities apply and get financial support. And you can find out more about them in our show notes, and you can help out at childsplaycharity.org.
Yes, and a little bit of background on Child's Play. If you guys don't know about them, that was started by the guys over at Penny Arcade, longtime gamers of all walks.
They're awesome.
They're awesome folks doing amazing work. And lastly, we just want to take a moment in our Grognards Doing Good segment to appeal to all of the Grognards out there. We are ready to go back to conventions. We are ready to get back to gaming in person.
Hallelujah. Yes.
And we just want to ask you all, if you haven't gotten a vaccine, please do so. Delta variant is on the rise. It is becoming more rampant in more parts of the state, of the country, here in the U.S., around the world as well. And some of those places are places where there are gaming conventions. And if we cannot get this under control, those conventions are going to go offline again. And who knows if they can make it a second time. So do your part, get a vaccine, wear a mask, let's get through this, let's get back in person. All right. So, with that out of the way, let's talk about what do we do when D&D does not meet our fantasy needs. So, I think first off, I was thinking about how do we kick this off, Derek. I think the first thing is let's talk about our personal preferences of fantasy. Because I think your preferred D&D fantasy setting and my preferred D&D fantasy setting may be a little bit different. Maybe not completely, but I think a little bit. So if you had your pick, if you could run any D&D fantasy world or any fantasy campaign setting, so not necessarily D&D created, either TSR or Wizards, but just say, I want to take this fantasy genre setting, this novel series, this movie, something like that, and convert it into an RPG. What would you do?
Well, if it was anything, something, what I run and what I play in are always two different things. As a game master, because I have played at so many conventions and places like that, I tend to enjoy running whatever my players are interested in playing in. That's what I enjoy running. I have a little bit of preferences. I tend to prefer fantasy settings or stranger modern settings to run, but overall, I enjoy running whatever my players want. But what I like to play in, for the most part, in a fantasy setting, is a world like Conan's Hyboria.
Okay.
I really a sword and sorcery grit type person. I like things like that. Fritz Leiber's Lankmar. Running around in a mega city. That idea of a campaign that is just centered around that and what's going on behind the scenes is good.
Yep.
One classic setting that doesn't get a much play nowadays was put out by Judges Guild, and it's called The Wilderlands of High Fantasy. I really love that setting too. So yeah, I like a low magic setting.
Okay.
But not too low. You know what I mean? I don't want it too low magic, which is the way early AD&D felt.
Yeah.
Because you had to wait before you got stuff. I mean, your third level, you get a +1 sword. You're like, woohoo!
Yeah.
Wow, I got a +1 sword at third level.
Well, was it the Moldvay box or Moldvay edition where a cleric didn't even get spells until second level?
That's right.
Yeah.
You didn't even get a healing spell until you hit second level.
And you probably only had about 4 hit points.
I think the hit die for a cleric was D8.
Oh, was it?
D8,
well, so yeah, on average, you would have 4 or 5 hit points.
Yeah,
probably.
on average 4. But it was still not bad because the idea was a cleric could go in and do a little combat damage. They did better combat damage than a wizard would, that's for sure. Yes,
definitely.
So that's kind of the theme of what I like.
I like it. And I like some of that too. I if you go to my website and you look at my comic, chronicle.cc, shameless plug, you're going to find that it looks pretty high fantasy. The main character is an elf wizard, and right now where we're at, he's gone home to visit his mother, who is a druid. So there's magic all over the place, right? But I like going down to the ground level in that kind of setting, and ramping up. So that kind of happened. Hey, Todd, thanks for the follow. Appreciate it. So our campaign that we're running right now, that I've been running us on for goodness over a year now. We started out boots on the ground level. These guys were low level adventurers working for an adventuring company, and are now to the point where they are Vipe 29, Steve, one of our other Chronicle players, they're now to the point where they're taking on re-emerging gods, because we've gone that long. But as far as what do I like to play in, I'm kind of like you. I honestly like the idea of running city campaign or playing in city campaigns. I wish I was as good at running city campaigns as I am at playing in them. I just inevitably want to get out of the city when I'm running a city campaign. Like, all right, I've put you in the bottle. Now we've played in the bottle long enough. It's time to break the bottle and get out. But I've got a couple of those cities in Chronicle where you could run an entire city campaign. I really like that. I loved Lonkmar. I loved Fawford and Grey Mouser. Thieves World. Those were some good stuff right there.
I still have that box set.
Yeah,
I still have that box set.
Yeah.
Ooh.
So it's definitely got a place in my heart. But just in general, when I'm building a world, when I'm running a game, it's much more high fantasy, and that's because of that. Where is it? Right there. That's because of that Dragonlance, Weiss and Hickman influence. That's just really strong there. So we've hit on some of the major differences, right? We've hit on low magic versus high magic. We've hit on low fantasy versus high fantasy. I don't know if either of us would necessarily say that we like to play grimdark. Like, I mean, Thieves World could touch on grimdark there, but I wouldn't. Would you consider Fawford and Grey Mouser grimdark? I wouldn't.
Oh, not at all.
No.
I consider Fawford and Grey Mouser fun fantasy.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
So much of that is tongue in cheek.
Yeah.
And laughter. I mean, and when you said about something about running a city setting, that's one of the things, like one of the stories in Lankmar is the undercity that they had that was ruled by these mice.
Yes.
Okay. It was ruled by the mice and the humans, who were kind of these human mice hybrid type things. And that story just made me laugh and laugh and laugh, because here's the Grey Mouser, who was always so short, and now he's there in that area at the size of a mouse.
Yep.
And it is absolutely hilarious.
Yeah.
Because he's starting to talk about how sexy he thinks one of the mouse women are.
Right.
And I'm going, wow, he was writing furry fanfic back in the 80s. But it's really good. And but no, I would definitely not classify that as grimdark.
Yeah.
I do have a couple of grimdark settings here. Grimdark is something I would not want to do for an extended campaign.
Yeah.
But definitely 3 or 4 sessions in a grimdark setting can be fun.
Yeah.
For me.
Yeah, yeah. And we'll talk about on the back half of the show. We'll talk about a couple of systems that really do grimdark well, and how to work those in. But you can see, and I'm sure everybody that's in the chat, let us know what is your preferred flavor of fantasy, if you've got one. Maybe you're a Lord of the Rings. We didn't even talk about that. Some people just want, epic Lord of the Rings, and they want to live, at the end of an age where the civilization's about to fall apart and start over again. And some people want to go like full Narnia. And have all types of furry creatures everywhere. There's a little bit of all of that, and you can do all of that. So bog standard D&D, we can start off with the 5th edition and just say Forgotten Realms. But honestly, if you go back to older editions and you say your default setting is Greyhawk, there's not at a high level, there's not much difference between the two. It is a mostly Western European high fantasy setting with multiple principalities and kingdoms and nations, and they all have their own little individual specific thing that's going on there. But you can pretty much fit anything into that world. They're designed to be highly accessible. But what if you don't like that? What if you want to get something that's a little more tailor-made? What if you want something that's a little more that's maybe not as Western or maybe not as high fantasy? Well, there's some options there as well. So the first thing you can do, Derek and I just kind of like talking through this earlier this week, just dropped a couple of ideas in. How can you change this up? So without going to another system, because we're going to talk about that too. We're eventually going to get to the point to be like, hey, you know what? You don't even have to do D&D. You can go do something else. And we've got a whole list of those. But before we do that, some ways that you can just take D&D and swap it up a little bit. First off, just change the setting. It doesn't have to be Western fantasy, Tolkien, the Tolkien lineage of fantasy. You can bring it, from somewhere else. Derek and I, right before this, were talking about Avatar. The new Avatar, The Last Airbender role-playing game that came out today on Kickstarter and is blowing up like crazy. That's a very Eastern setting. And it has some, there is definitely some ties to some Eastern mythology there. And you can do that. You can bring it from another area of the geography of the lore. I saw a really good and I cannot think of the name of it right now, but I saw a really good setting that is all set in, it's 5th edition, but it's all set in ancient, like Ireland, Irish mythology. So the Aeshead and the Tuatha Dé are all playable, lineages. So there's definitely a lot of, things to be delved in there, and I'll try to find the name of that. It was really cool. I almost picked it up and I didn't.
Well, and another place you can go to, you have the Eastern or the Asian settings you could use.
Yep.
And there's a variety of those out there. But what a lot of people ignore are those of us who have a Western European heritage. We miss out on a really cool setting you could work with too, and that's Eastern European.
Yes.
You get some Eastern Europeanisms thrown into D&D, like Baba Yaga and things like that. But you could do an entire setting based around an Eastern European style. I mean, you could do a non-Strahd, like, if you want to stay out of Ravenloft, do a non-Strahd Transylvania style, where you have a really big, authoritarian ruler, and throw in a lot of those Eastern European myths that are so often ignored, and there are some scary beat myself on that one. Some scary ASS monsters in Eastern European mythology, man.
Yeah.
Those things are awesome.
Yeah. Well, The Witcher, right? I mean, the Witcher is Eastern European, right?
And that's a great setting for that.
Mm-hmm. It is. It really is. It really is. And there is an RPG. Art Talsorian, the same folks that do Cyberpunk, have a Witcher RPG. If you haven't seen it, it's pretty cool. I've got a copy of it over on my shelf back there. And
the good thing is if you want to go with Eastern European, like we were talking about, if you want to stay within the D&D framework without moving on to another rule set, so many of those monsters are so easy to bridge that gap.
Absolutely. Well, and that's one of the things I think that we can talk about as well is that, there is a Witcher RPG, but you can also just take the things that are in there and put them into D&D. And we'll do I really have this great idea about doing a whole homebrew show sometime, talking about ways you can homebrew. But just real quickly, the easiest way you can do that is find some analog for what you're wanting to do. It might be like some Eastern European mythology around a strange crone troll like creature. Just throw that on top of a troll, and then maybe grab something from a hag and toss it on there. It doesn't. You don't have to stat the whole thing out. You can literally just overlay, and I promise you, no one will know the difference.
Hey, look at some of the comments.
I know. I was about to say, we've got some good comments here.
Yeah, I like what Vipe said here. He said, I like the idea of fantasy settings that involve animals that act like people. I'm actually listening to an audiobook, which I'm not going to mention by name right now, that does that, and it does it very well. But I'm not mentioning it because there's a lot of sex in this book that I was not expecting. I'm not a prude, but furries getting it on is
a little bit different.
But I think it's fun to see an animal's traits play out in their personalities, just like Vipe said.
Yes.
And I think part of it goes back to my childhood love of the Disney Robin Hood movie.
I
love you, Vipe. I love you. I love that movie. That's a great movie.
And there is a setting for that. 5th edition compatible Humblewood. If Humblewood is exactly that. It is forest creatures that are also D&D characters. And
there's a D20 compatible one too that
well, this is D20. This is 5th edition compatible. Humblewood is.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. But you can play bird folk, you can play fox folk, you can play there's even like deer, which is really interesting because of like the strange like height nature of it all. So like I'm this little tiny little owl, or I'm this little squirrel folk, and then I've got this big giant tall deer folk. It's pretty awesome, and they all live in this big giant tree that looks like the Tree of Life from Disney, Animal Kingdom. We also, Vic Danger says, my old world 1st edition was mid to high fantasy with low magic. My new world is more swords and sorcery-ish. So mid to high fantasy with low magic. So you've got
most high fantasy is low magic, to be honest. Lord of
the Rings, right? That's kind of what I was thinking. I was like, Lord of the Rings fits that description, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Lord of the Rings, easily a low magic
setting.
And it's interesting you say it, Big Danger, because I was thinking about that. Oh God,
bringing in some Jack Vance. Yeah.
Oh, that would be nice. But what you're saying here about, I have found that high fantasy seems to be much more low magic, whereas sword and sorcery, that's the whole idea. You're slinging spells left and right.
Yeah.
You're there going up against these things. And I think that's one of the things always kind of got me about Conan. When I was reading Conan, I started reading Conan comics when I started playing D&D, and I was like, wait a second, Conan, I know you need a magical sword to hit that creature. And then somehow Conan would find a magical sword along the way, but he never kept it. And that always annoyed me.
Well, he had his sword. His it was his sword.
Oh, well, I'm talking the Savage Sword of Conan,
Yeah, yeah,
which,
right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
you know,
Yeah,
he never kept the same sword. This is what I'm talking about right here.
yeah.
This sort of thing. Can you see that?
Oh
Can you
yeah,
see
I
that?
know those.
Oh,
Those were
I
so
love
good.
these.
Those were
And
so good.
he tossed swords around like,
Yeah.
he didn't care. He
No,
didn't care.
no, no, he didn't. Um, no, great
Barbarian.
comments. Great comments.
My first fighter was Nanok the Barbarian because I was a stupid kid who wasn't that creative.
we all did.
Nanok is Conan spelled backwards
Right,
for
right.
those of you
You aren't tracking.
who aren't tracking that.
Yeah, the well, I think we all did that, right? I think I had one of my first characters was Tasselhoff Burfoot copy. So
There you go.
you know,
Well, yeah,
everybody does
we're
that
in
with their
good
favorite.
company. We were in good company. Luke Gygax wanted to run a magic elf, and he named the freaking thing Melf. Okay,
Yep, yep, exactly,
yeah.
exactly. Um, so we can change the setting.
Hey, Rudolph's here. Hey,
Hey, there he
Rudolph.
is.
We were missing you. Good to see you, Rudolph.
You can change your time period. So I think that's another we can talk about is
Yeah,
we can
definitely.
go to urban. You can add in like urban modern fantasy. You can do Dresden Files style fantasy, and honestly, within the confines of D&D, all that means is you just got to think about if you're going to add in firearms and vehicles, and you don't even have to really worry about that too much. It can a lot of that stuff can just be part of your flavor. Like you don't have to go stat out cars in D&D. You just drive the car and then you're fine. But that's another one. You can go the other direction. You can go deeper into history. So we tend to think of D&D as being a medieval Renaissance analog. You could go deeper if you wanted to. You could go to a prehistory time, a Babylonian, Egyptian, ancient civilization time if you want to. There's some great campaign settings for that stuff.
And my campaign setting, that's what I'm using.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm using,
yeah, exactly what you're doing with your campaign setting.
yeah, I'm using ancient world myths, and one of the nice things about the setting that I put together is you can go in one part of the world you have Babylon, but in another part of the world you have King Arthur type setting.
Yeah,
And so you could have the Babylonians meeting the Arthurians and deal with those technological changes there and how they would fight against each other.
Yep. I think that's awesome. That's almost like playing like Civ, right? Like you've got all the different cultures kind of clashing with each other at the same time, right? I like that.
Yeah.
Then we had Change the Theme, which we've already talked about pretty
Yeah.
well. Low magic, sword and sorcery, woodland creatures that we had on there. One we didn't talk about, which I think Derek is going to talk a lot more about here in a minute, as young adventurers. So if you, especially if you're running D&D with kids, letting them play kids and running a fantasy setting like that is a lot of fun. I know you've got one. I don't want to spoil it unless you want to talk. Just give a teaser for what you've got.
Well, one of the things while running a young adventurer is not necessarily my cup of tea. There is, in our culture now, there are so many movies, so many films out there, so many TV shows that have young adventurers. And a lot of times in the D&D games, we don't deal with the growth of the player character as they're growing. So I think it would be one of the really nice things you could do is take a young adventurer about 15 or 16 years old, just starting to make it out into the world.
Yeah.
have a group of young orphans or something like
Yeah.
that whose village was attacked while the kids were out hunting or playing or whatever. And that whole group has that shared experience and they begin going out and adventuring and the growth that they're growing through as young people. And I think even adults can get something out of that, especially if you got teenagers around the house.
Yep.
It could be an interesting way to handle that growing experience and watching your characters grow and age into their 20s.
Yeah. So Vipe mentions that I have a setting that I run with kids. I taught his daughter how to play along with my boys and some friends one time. I won't talk about how ruthless he was for his son's birthday session. He did for him and his friends. That's true. But we did do. What we did there is I did sort of a custom D&D rules light where we didn't necessarily worry about too much about heavy combat stats or anything like that. But what I did was basically I created a custom kid class in which they got to pick one or two of the things that would eventually lead to a first level character. So they might get 2 proficiency choices, things that they're just better at. We don't even have to say, hey, you've got you have a proficiency in this. It's just, this is something you're good at. And then every time that they would level up, they would get the next thing. They might get the bonus to, their attack that they would get at first level. They might get a spell. They might get, something to that effect. They might get a little bit of extra hit points. And it basically scales up into first level, but there's that growth there. And then as far as the setting goes, they were just adventuring outside their village. Didn't have like a traumatic experience or anything like that. It was just, these are kids going out and realizing there's a lot more in the woods than rabbits and squirrels.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, and then so lastly, and you threw this one on here, Derek. So I'll let you talk about this one. The last point, which is just don't be afraid to create your own.
And I think most of our viewers here tonight are familiar with home brewing and taking it and creating their own setting. But some of our listeners who come along later may be afraid to create their own setting and they want to go with something that's standard. The key is in creating your own setting is not to be afraid of making mistakes, because we're all going to make mistakes. We're all going to have inconsistencies in our setting. And that's where it helps to have our players' input in the setting. So when we create our own setting, let's not try and do it ourselves. I made that mistake when I was younger, is I tried to just make my own setting myself and put all the work on my end. And when I did that, I knew that setting really well, but my players still had so much to learn. So I went through and I created this thing out of whole cloth, and then I had to communicate that to my players. But when I started realizing, hey, what happens if I ask my players for their input and their inspiration? They become really invested in the campaign, and they'll throw weird, crazy stuff in there. But when they do, they find that their being a part of that campaign and that history of the world means that I have less to worry about keeping track of, because if they add something of their own flavor to that campaign setting, they're going to remember it.
Yeah.
And that always will throw something different. That always throws a monkey wrench into it, and it allows it to have a much different flavor.
Yeah. I mean, it's the organic, crowdsourcing, right? I mean, that's so. You might have a player that likes Lord of the Rings. You might have a player that likes anime. there's no reason those can't both coexist together. You as the GM and you as a group figure out how that peanut butter and that chocolate work together, right? All right. So next up, what is new on your shelf? So I'm actually going to let you go first because we were just talking about young adventurers. You want to talk about what's new on your shelf or what you have to show off?
Yeah, what I'm going to show you guys here is this. It's not exactly new on my shelf. I've had this for a little while now. I got this for my son. It's called Wordlings. And Wordlings is a 5th edition campaign setting. And it is an enchanted setting centered around children who are the saviors of the land, who venture on epic quests to protect their realm. And they hold on to the virtues of youth, and it seems fun. WizKids has put out a great line of miniatures to go with it. Yep. The miniatures are great and can be used for any campaign setting. But one of the cool things is that it's really good for kids. It really, really is. And the idea behind the setting itself is these children have been blessed by the grace of one of the gods, and they became the only inhabitants of this world with a natural ability for magic. So children are the only ones who have this natural ability. And the gods made them what they call their wardlings, and the magical beings, which once protected everyone, now protected only them as bonded familiars. However, when they reach the age of 18, they take on the burdens and knowledge of their new responsibilities. They became reawakened and forgot their magic as its importance faded in the new light of adulthood. So the idea is, of course, that it's centered around that magical time of childhood. And when you grow up, you forget that magical time. You forget those adventurers, those adventures you had. And that is a kind of a cool concept, which goes with so many stories of kids who had all these great adventures when they were a kid, and then they grew up and they forgot about all those stories they used to tell as a child. Good. So I think you could do a lot of fun stuff with that. Yeah. You could play that with your kids, as an intro to D&D, and then when they're 18, get them into another fantasy game and say, remember, you've forgotten all that, and just mess with their heads. That'd be a little mean, but sounds like something I'd do. But yes, Big Danger said sounds like real life.
Yep, that's the truth, right?
Yeah, it is the truth. But it could be a great game to play with kids, but I think adults could have fun with that.
I think so too. Well, and this, this goes back to the foundations of the genre, right? I mean, that's Chronicles of Narnia. Like, they had their adventures when they were kids, and when they got to be a certain age, they couldn't come back anymore. They'd become adults. They'd become too boring.
and then C.S. Lewis kills them.
And then C.S. Lewis kills them all. Spoilers for, a nearly century-old book series, but yeah. So that is one different way you can do fantasy. I also have one. Let me pull this up here.
Oh yeah.
So
I know you're excited about this.
Well, I am excited about this, but at the same time, I think this is just one that's worth talking about because I don't think it got enough. I don't think it got enough love. We talked about this on last week's show. This was part of the bundle of holdings, one of their charity bundles, which was the complete set of Lone Wolf, the Lone Wolf adventure game, which is just gone out of print from Pubicle 7, and they. Unfortunately, I don't think have the license anymore after Joe Deaver, the creator of Lone Wolf, passed away suddenly. However, you can still find this out there. I think it may still be available around Drive-Thru RPG for a little bit longer. But this is another sword and sorcery style setting. It's based on these. These are here. The old Lone Wolf. There we go. The old Lone Wolf Choose Your Own Adventure style RPG books from the early to mid 90s. And in it, you play the last of the Kai Lords, which is they're basically like fantasy Jedi. They're these monks that live off on their own and are brought in to do justice and that sort of thing. And then at the very beginning of the first book, they all get killed off except for you because you were out cutting wood. Classic setup, right? And you journey through this land trying to avenge all of your fallen comrades and keep the kingdom from falling to destruction. So where the adventure game kind of picks up is that you can play your all Kai Lords, but it's pretty sword and sorcery, pretty low magic, and if you remember those books, this adventure game uses basically the same system that the books used. You have a combat table that is just a cross-reference of your score and the enemy score, and you see how you roll or what number you pick, and then that tells you what your damage is. It's real simple. And you don't even have to use dice. You can just do the number grid pick that was like at the back of the books. It's a lot of fun. It's a completely different setting. There are also, and this is why I brought this up for this particular discussion, there are setting books that are completely rules agnostic. So if you just want to look at a different sword and sorcery, semi-low magic setting and get some really great ideas for things that you can use in your own campaign, go look at those books because there's some really well-written, deep lore that came out of a series of like 20 novels that you can go grab. So go check those out. Vipe says, this reminds me of Kids on Bikes. I think that might be good for teens. Kids on Bikes is awesome. I've got a copy of it. We should pull that out sometime. You can use it for a lot of different things. You can use it for Stranger Things style games. You can use it for Goonie style games. You can use it in sci-fi settings. You could totally run it as a fantasy wordling style game as well. You just adapt it just a little bit. But yeah, no, you absolutely could do that. So another one that Steve at Vipe brings up is setting it in the American Revolution. There is an RPG called Revolutionaries, which was through Drive-Thru RPG, that uses some of that setting in a fantasy style as well. I've also kind of dabbled with it as well. I just have to be anytime I start going too deep on it, then I'm like, ooh, how much into colonialism am I getting? And I always back off just a little bit. But that's an interesting time period, especially if you're setting it in, say, like the early stages of it, like post-French Indian War, early revolution, that kind of like the untamed wilderness type situation. That's there's something there. Last of the Mohicans in a fantasy setting, I think would be amazing. Let me just throw that out there. That does sound pretty awesome.
That does sound pretty awesome.
Okay, so those are things that we're spotlighting. Neither one of these are necessarily new, but there are other options for you out there to take a look at. So we're now kind of going to shift gears here, and we're going to talk about some classics and hidden gems in each genre. We did this a couple of weeks ago, got about halfway through our list. And I think we're just going to start off here at the top with fantasy. So we've talked about several already. We've talked about Humblewood. We've talked about Lone Wolf. We've talked about Wordlings. But I think there's a few others. If we're talking about other fantasy game systems that we cannot go without talking about, because at least I know a couple of them are friends of the show, so we need to at least mention them. So first off is Hackmaster. Longtime friend of yours, Jolly Blackburn, creator of Knights at the Dinner Table. Hackmaster started off as the D&D analog in those comics, and then eventually turned into its own rule system that you can play.
Yeah, Hackmaster has a fun and storied history. The first Hackmaster role-playing game was seen by many as a parody game because Kids or Co. amazingly got the license for first and second edition to use the rules and everything in there. They just had a parody clause that so many of their products had to be parodied. But eventually they lost that license, with much the disappointment of many hardcore grognards out there. And so they made their own version of a fantasy role-playing system.
Yep.
And with them, you can't get much grittier and swords and sorceryer than Hackmaster 5e. Because that is a game that has low magic, low healing. You can die really quick in it. It has one of the best initiative counters I've seen in a game. You do have to use an initiative counter, but it's pretty cool in that initiative just keeps going up and going up and going up. And so, like, say you start out with a 3 on initiative, and they just go, okay, who goes on 1, who goes on 2, who goes on 3, and then you add your next part of initiative to that. So then your next initiative, say it was a +4 or whatever, your next initiative will be a 7, and then who goes on 4, who goes on 5, who goes on 6, goes on 7.
Yep.
That makes Hackmaster kind of cool there.
Yep.
But if you want grit, you want high mortality, high player character deaths, play you some Hackmaster. That is a tough, harsh system.
Yeah. Yeah. And then also we had on our list Castles and Crusades.
Yeah, Castles and Crusades is a great D20 system. It's very similar to anything that you've played on 3.x. You will be familiar with Castles and Crusades. I probably mentioned this on here before. I know I've mentioned it on other media. What is generally referred to as a difficulty class and other systems, they have really good rules for ability checks in that system. Basically, they go back and they use the old prime requisites. So if your class has a prime requisite of strength and you need to basically roll a strength ability check, your base DC is going to be a 12. If it's not your character class's prime requisite, your base DC is going to be at 18. And to roll on that, what you have to do is you roll a D20. You add your ability score bonus, and you add your levels. So say you have an ability score bonus of +2, and your 5th level, you've automatically got a +7 to that roll. So if it's a class skill, you might only need to roll a 12, but there are other rules for upping that difficulty class as well, depending on the difficulty of the action. It's very fluid. It's very nice. And I still use that even when I'm running 5th edition to help me make up a difficulty class on the fly. A huge fan of Castles and Crusades. I played it for a long time before when 3rd edition. I was playing it while I was playing 3rd edition, but I was also when 4th edition came out. We only played 4th edition for a little while, so I played a lot more Castles and Crusades, and I've run a lot of Castles and Crusades at conventions. So I highly recommend that. It's a lot of fun. Again, not a high magic game. Can be a little bit grittier, so player deaths can occur more often, which is something that as a castle keeper or dungeon master, I appreciate.
Yep. One of the other things I like about Castles and Crusades are their codexes. So we were talking about earlier, if you want to pull in mythology from another area of the world. They've got
Yeah.
a lot of different codexes around that. Those are just good references. Those are just good references for any game master, the Castle Keeper.
And to me, it is one of the few fantasy role-playing systems that all you need to play the game is the player's handbook.
Yes.
That is it.
Yeah.
In fact, they even came out with a few players' handbooks that had like monsters and treasure attached to it. So on one side you had the player's handbook, and then you had more monsters and treasure on the other side. I mean, yeah, you can get the Castle Keeper's Guide, the player's handbook, and monsters and treasure if you're a completionist.
Right.
But really, all you need to run that game is that player's handbook, which is really, really cool.
The Castle Keeper's Guide reminds me a lot of the because it's D20, reminds me a lot of the 3rd edition DM's Guide. There wasn't really anything in there you had to have to run D&D. You could run everything D&D strictly out of the player's handbook. The DM's Guide just gave you a lot more options. And that's the Castle Keeper's Guide reminds me of that a whole lot. Yeah. One I just added on there because I realized we didn't have it on there was just Dungeon Crawl Classics.
Yeah, that's a meat grinder.
Yeah, it is. It is. And if you like that, then go for it. There's some really classic feeling 1st edition style campaign modules there. Go check those out. And then
if you're a dice goblin, man, Dungeon Crawl Classics is there for you because they've got some funky dice. I think they've got like a D3 in there that they could use. So they use lots of wacky dice, which is fun. But I will say this about Goodman Games, and I don't have a personal connection to Goodman Games like I do with Kenzerco and a lot of the other companies we talk about. I've met Joe Goodman. I've met the crew that does that. They're really nice people, but I don't know them that well. So take this right here. They make some of the best adventures I've ever seen. If you're like me and you love pre-generated adventures to kind of tweak a little bit, what we used to refer to as modules, they have some great stuff out there.
Yep.
And I really love their adventures.
Also, they are doing some reprints. I know you've got one. You want to show off what one of those is?
Which one? Let me turn off my camera as I get up here. I'll show you what they've done here.
Yeah.
Let's see. Stop my video here so you don't see my butt. 1 second.
So while he's grabbing that, so basically what they have started doing is going back, and some of you may know this, but if you're listening and you don't know what any of this is, they are going back and grabbing some of those classic 1st edition modules and reprinting and revising them for 5th edition, and they are also adding to them as well. So here's Castle Amber.
I have these. This is the 5th one they've come out with.
Yeah.
I haven't had this one for that long, so it could have gone on what's new on my shelf. But this adventure is an homage to the original X2 Castle Amber. And Tom Moldvay, and is partially inspired by the writings of acclaimed weird fiction author Clark Ashton Smith, who, if you've never read any Clark Ashton Smith, go read Clark Ashton Smith because he's awesome.
Yep.
And crazy. But they did a great job on this. The only downside of this is because of their licensing agreement, from what I understand. Look at that, a trifold map in a book. When's the last time you saw a trifold map in a book? But sadly, because of their license agreement, you cannot get these in PDF.
Correct.
And because they are a hardback book, it does make trying to run it difficult.
Yeah.
But because they put that really good binding on it.
Yeah, it's got perfect binding on it. Yep.
It's got that perfect binding, a ribbon here.
Yep.
Look, look at this. Look at this.
It lays flat.
It lays flat. No breaking the spine.
Yeah.
Goodman
They're
Games. Awesome. The name of that company describes their products.
Yep.
You could call them Greatman games.
Yep.
And again, no deep personal connection like I have with a lot of people in the industry. This is just me as a fan saying,
Yep.
my God, look at the quality of product they put out.
And the next one they're doing, I just saw, was Temple of Elemental Evil.
Yes, it is. And of course, I'm getting that bad boy.
Yeah.
Ooh, Lord.
Yeah.
Though I will say, trying to run Temple of Elemental
Evil, it's rough.
It's rough. So I am intrigued to see how that will be revamped, because we haven't seen a real revamping of that since third edition's
return.
Yeah, which was okay.
It was okay. Out of the return series, it wasn't my favorite. I think Return to Tomb of Horrors was probably the favorite, because that one wasn't third edition. That was second edition. But Return to Undermountain was pretty good. Return to Ravenloft wasn't too bad. But
Rudolph, thank you that you're going to have that one. I wish that Goodman Games gave us money for promoting their products, but
maybe
they don't. They don't. But at least we got somebody to find something cool. That's what we're about, man. We want you to find cool stuff.
We're going to start throwing up some affiliate links, I think, maybe here shortly. Some Amazon affiliate links on our show notes. So if you do want to support us, that would be a great way to do that. I don't know if I'll be able to do that with the Goodman game stuff. I don't know if that's through Amazon or not. But
you can pick them up on Amazon.
Well, there we go. We'll put it on our affiliate store when we get that going. Okay, so last one I do want to mention just really briefly on fantasy is there is a game. It's in beta now. It's called Shadow Dark. It is a rules light RPG, 5th edition inspired, but takes out all of the 5th edition superheroics and goes back to old school dungeon crawl, high level death, but with the very simple rules of 5th edition, with things like advantage and disadvantage. You can go ahead and get that playtest beta copy if you go look up the Arcane Library. Kelsey Dion, she debuted this at Ethereal GaryCon this year. It's a neat little system. If you sign up for her mailing list, you can be added to her Discord, where you can go find that playtest beta copy. It's still in the works. I think it's probably going to be due out sometime late this year, maybe early next year, but all published through her website. But it's a fun little system. I really like it, and I can't wait to be able to talk about it more. It's just because it's in playtest beta, I don't want to get too deep into it because some of it may change, but go look that up. I know one of the things
early on Shadow Dark that they did for any of our old school grognards on here is XP is purely treasure based.
It is. It is because it is a dungeon crawling game.
Let me get some loot, boys and girls. Okay. That's a hint to my dungeon master that we don't get a whole lot of loot in his game, and I'm just saying.
Have you ever gone without?
Oh, my character never goes without.
No,
of course not, because my character.
I give you what you need.
Yeah, you can't. Your theory, your theme is you can't always get what you want.
It's true.
But you try sometime,
and you might just find.
Yeah, you get what you need.
Get what you need.
Yeah,
you've always got what you need.
Yeah.
All right. So moving on from fantasy, just post-apocalyptic. Couple of highlights here.
What a list, man! What a list we've got for post-apocalyptic.
We got Gamma World.
Yep. Good old
Gamma World. You can find Gamma World on DriveThruRPG. It's still out there. It's the grandpappy of post-apocalyptic. Good.
Yeah, that third edition when they tried to turn it into a collectible card game or something.
Yeah.
I don't recommend that one for that. It would just be hard to play. Yeah, go back to the classic on Gamma World.
Yeah. Mutant Crawl Classic, so another Goodman Games.
Yes, and that one was written by a good friend of mine, Jim Wampler. Jim Wampler is also a comic book artist, a web comic artist. He just recently did some art for Jolly Blackburn for Knights of the Dinner Table. That is a really, really great game. And I would say the mutations that your characters can go through are really, really awesome.
Cool. And then also on here, Mutant Future. I don't know anything about this one. You said it's OSR.
Yeah, Mutant Future is just, you could find that online. It is an old school Renaissance, old school revival style version of post-apocalyptic role playing. So if you're familiar with the rules of D&D from back in the day, in the 80s and such, Mutant Future is really great, really fun, and really quick to pick up and play. It has some mutations in there. It's not expensive. Let me see what that's still going for. I know you can still pick it up on Drive Through RPG. It is, let's see. Yeah, it's put out by Goblinoid Games. That's right. And Goblinoid Games put out a lot of OSR stuff. It's the sinister and sadistic bleeding of spider goats echoes in the night. That line sold me right there when I first read it. The idea of a spider goat. It's $15 on there. You can also get the PDF and a soft cover for $18.46. Really, really fun, really quick game. So if you ever tried like Labyrinth Lord or any of those games or Advanced Edition rules or any of that stuff that was a part of the OSR movement, I would highly recommend it for that.
Okay.
I've never gotten a chance to play it, but I have read through the rules quite a few times, and I can tell you, if you played old school games, you will love Mutant Future.
Cool.
And it's cheap.
Yeah, 15. That's not bad.
Yeah.
Moving on to superheroes. So the first one on the list is the classic TSR Marvel superheroes. I will cause a little bit of controversy here, and I will say that this is probably still the best superhero RPG. The other ones that are on this list are all great superhero games. I just don't know if they beat it. The classic face rip system. You cannot beat a better acronym for your attributes than face rip. And the universal power chart table with your percentile and seeing what works and how. This was one of the first systems that goes into zoned combat instead of grid-based combat. So you talk about doing your combat in areas rather than in 5 foot, 10 foot increments, because we're talking superhero powers, and that's kind of silly to say. Cyclops' optic blast goes for 30 feet. No, it's a beam of energy that comes out of his eyeballs. There were some definite innovations that came out of this. The ability to affect your outcome with karma points, which can be like character points and other things. Like that hadn't happened too much at that point in time as well. So there's some really neat ideas that come out of it, and it has that 80s, late 70s, early 80s Marvel feel to it. And a lot of that early modern age Marvel bullpen era comics. If you grew up with that stuff, with Spidey when he was still in college, or the X-Men when they were still living at the school, things like that. It's got a great feel to it, and you can update it. I run a game of it at GaryCon. Derek's played in a game of it at a game day here in Nashville, and I update it with the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So you can You can play the MCU versions of the characters. It's pretty easy to convert. So there's that one. Heroes Unlimited is another one that I threw in there. This one is really, I think, the only time we really talk about Palladium, but it was just because I don't think either Derek or I are huge Palladium fans, but it was a good one, and it had a very robust power set, which you want in a good superhero RPG. So that one did make the list. Hero system, we talked about this with some of our audience a while back. You can use hero system for anything, but it was originally designed to be for superheroes. This system has the best power set. If there is one reason why this beats out Marvel, is because you can custom tune your powers to the nth degree with hero system. I can say I want to do fire blasts, but I want to do fire blasts that only do this. They only are in this shape, or they are only at this level, or they only do that. You can do all of that. You can custom build any power set that you need with the hero system. It's amazing for that. The rest of it is a little too gritty for me. Oh, not gritty, crunchy for me. But I do like the power build system in it. But it's a great book. And then Mutants and Masterminds is another one. D20 based.
Mutants and Masterminds was the first superheroes role-playing game I'd ever played. I'd always looked at villains and vigilantes back in the day, but never got to play it. And then after I got older and I looked at the rules for villains and vigilantes, I said, no, that's not for me. But when Mutants and Masterminds came out, I had friends who wanted to play it, and we played the heck out of some Mutants and Masterminds. Love that system. I love it. One of the things I liked about it, you were talking about power levels in the hero system. That was a nice thing about Mutants and Masterminds. You could, they recommended, I think it was, you start off at like power level 10, which already gave you a certain level of power, but you could start off weaker if you wanted it to be a low superhero game, and then your heroes could grow in power. So as you got more power points, you get more abilities. And I was running some type of like ninja cybernetic character, to the point I got to where I was like almost shadow running into games, hooking into the local Wi-Fi. And we stopped playing before I could get the nanite build, where I was just going to send nanites out to assassinate people. It was a blast, man. That's awesome. I love Mutants and Masterminds.
That's awesome. Next one, we put this one on here, Spies and Espionage. There's really only one that's really worth talking about, and that's Top Secret NWO. This is just a really elegant rebirth of the classic Top Secret game. Go grab that one. It's it's really neat. I haven't had a chance to play it, but I've looked through the books on it. It's just, if you want to play Spies, that's the one for you. Go grab that one. Western, couple of on here. So first off, we'll talk about I think the original one, right? Was Boot Hill the first?
I think Boot Hill may have been the first one. I first found out about Boot Hill when I was reading my 1E DMG, and they had instructions or rules on there how to bring a Boot Hill character into a D&D world, and how to bring the D&D character into the Boot Hill world.
Right? Yeah,
and that's where I first heard about it. I don't remember seeing a lot of ads for it back in the day, but talking with Jolly Blackburn, the people who published the next one up on our list, Boot Hill was really popular among a certain set of gamers, especially those guys who grew up watching John Wayne and Clint Eastwood. Though Boot Hill had more of a John Wayne Western flavor than the spaghetti Western flavor, from what I've been told. The rules were they'll tell you to this day the rules were very clunky.
Yeah.
But they did try, and if I'm remembering correctly, in the box sets, they did try to put like little standees in there so that you did have something to look at,
Yep.
and they would give you instructions on building towns and things of that nature, which could be a lot of fun.
Yep.
Just don't become a piano player in a video game unless you could shoot your gun really well, because they always try and shoot the piano player.
Yeah. And that holds true into our next one, aces and eights. So all right, Steve's out, Vipe's out. Thanks for hanging with us,
Steve, for hanging with us, man. We appreciate it.
So aces and eights, also like Derek said, Kinzer Jolly Blackburn. This Aces and Eights was another one that started out as a game in the Knights of the Dinner Table comic, and eventually turned into an actual game.
Yeah.
What do you think? What do you think about Aces and Eights? I want to hear your thoughts on Aces and Eights first, because obviously you're friends with Jolly. You're more connected.
I played Aces and Eights before it was a book.
Yeah.
I played Aces and Eights with Jolly when they were playtesting it. I got to playtest some of it at Gen Con. I would talk with Jolly about it when it was coming out. The quality of the book, some of the quality of the way the books were put together on the early ones, they were really upset. They came out kind of bad, so they had it reprinted. They got onto their printers for that. But when they came out with it, I will say one of the things I loved about it, just combat-wise, was the shot clock.
Yes.
The shot clock is just perfection.
Yeah.
It definitely has the old school feel, because you're bringing out the grid, you're seeing where your shots go, all of that. I like that. Also, the flavor of the setting is really great, because the setting is not our Wild West. The setting is very different. They put in their own ideas about what would have happened if the Civil War went this way, what happened this way. So they've got America divided into different nations. So North America becomes all these different nations, and different things are going on. They really put some thought and some work into that setting. The only big issue is there is so much crunch in there that if you are not a heavy crunch person, you're not going to like it.
Yeah.
Because it is Wild West, and a Wild West game that is set in the real world needs to be lethal. And the problem with a highly lethal RPG that also has rich history and backstory for you to build your characters off of can frustrate the player when that character, whose backstory you just wrote about, suddenly gets taken out in a gunfight.
Yep. Yeah.
That said, they have some really wonderful mechanics in Aces and Eights.
Yeah. The like you said, the shot clock, the whole like tracking where your bullets hit. I don't know if I've ever seen a system that captures that as well as this does, in a crunchy yet dynamic way. Like it is. It's good. It's very well developed. Definitely go check it out. And then lastly, Deadlands. We can't talk about Western without talking about Deadlands. Deadlands is just so good. So many innovative game mechanics in there. The use of the deck. There's a lot of good stuff with Deadlands.
And the weird fantasy part about
yes.
it. The Weird West.
Yes.
The Weird West is great. And what I've loved about Deadlands is they have not, over the years, tied themselves to one specific system. They've been willing to outsource their product to, I know Savage Worlds published a version of Deadlands. GURPS did a version of Deadlands.
There's a D20 version.
Yeah, we won't talk about that.
Yeah, and I think we're
trying to be positive.
I think there's also, but I think there's also a fifth edition compatible one now. So you can, I think, I could be wrong there, but yeah, exactly. If you're familiar with any of these other overarching generic systems, you can probably find a way to work with Deadlands. It's got all of the, all of the great setting stuff, and it's flexible enough to fit into other systems. Now, the one thing I've always said about Deadlands is that the the movie was not great. Wild Wild West with Will Smith. It was not great. But when I saw that,
I said, bad about that movie. I love that movie.
I did too, but I know a lot of people didn't. But when I saw that, I said, "Oh, this is just Deadlands the movie. Like it doesn't quite have like the zombie factor to it that Deadlands can have, but it's definitely Weird West for sure. So there you go. There's you the appendix N for the night for Deadlands. And then anything else you want to say on Deadlands?
Just there is so much stuff you could do with it. I mean, Deadlands. If I could ever run a Jonah Hex game, for those of you who read the comics,
yes,
Jonah Hex and Deadlands seemed destined.
Yeah.
To meet up, and I'm sure somebody has done Jonah Hex Deadlands, but I mean, if you loved Jonah Hex as much as I love Jonah Hex, and I even liked the Jonah Hex movie, man,
it was fine. It was fine.
Who was that actor?
Josh Brolin, wasn't it?
Yeah, Josh Brolin.
It's Thanos.
Thanos himself was in Deadlands, so don't talk bad about the Jonah Hex movie, or he might. Out of existence.
It was fine.
But Deadlands is perfect for all of that stuff that you would like to do. I mean, I could see a Deadlands, Jonah Hex, and John Carter mashup.
Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Whoa. I give myself chills just thinking of the craziness I could do. But I need good grognards who understand both of those settings and want to say no to misogyny. So,
well, that's true. There is that. All right, and then lastly, to wrap things up, we just have a category that we couldn't for games we couldn't place anywhere else, and Derek came up with the great name of it. That's so random. So top of the list, Paranoia.
Paranoia. Oh man. It is a game I have never played, and I've heard there's a new edition out for it. But I have looked at the rules for it, and it just sounds so much like that would be like one of those games you play for 6 hours with friends who just want to go totally crazy and try and kill each other all the time.
Yeah.
If you've ever wanted a tabletop RPG that rewards PvP, Paranoia is the game for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean it's the ultimate dystopian RPG. You're all clones that work in a big cog of a dystopia, and more than likely you are going to either be turned in for being a traitor to the civilization, or you're just going to meet a fiery death. And a security trap somewhere.
Anybody who loved Logan's Run, love that.
Yeah,
and it's meant to be,
but to an absurd degree.
Exactly. Yeah, and it's just, and I can see why a game like Paranoia came out, because we had so many dark dystopian movies coming out in the 80s, 70s, and 80s, like Logan's Run.
Brazil,
1984.
Yep.
Oh, Brazil, that's a good one too.
Yep.
They were all so dark, and what Paranoia does is it takes a fun poke at those movies, which is kind of a release for any of us who grew up around that stuff. We needed that release from it, so that we didn't take all of that too seriously, because it all felt really real, and sometimes still does. So Paranoia is a good way to laugh at our own paranoia.
So you put Tunnels and Trolls on here.
Oh, Tunnels and Trolls. It's so funny because Tunnels and Trolls and D&D have an awkward history, because Dungeons and Dragons TSR tried to go after Tunnels and Trolls because they felt like they were trying to steal their IP.
Mm-hmm.
But I and Ken St. Andre is a strange bird. I've talked to him before. He's a fun guy, nice guy, but he's a little bit odd. But he's a fun person, and it's put out by Flying Buffalo, the people who put out Grimtooth. If you like Grimtooth's traps and all of that. And if you like Grimtooth, then you understand Tunnels and Trolls. It's meant to be a joke fantasy role-playing game. And according to Ken, at least when I've talked to him and when others have talked to him in interviews, he said the reason we weren't anything like Dungeons and Dragons is because we never took ourselves seriously.
Yeah.
We never wanted that high level of play that people associated with D&D. We didn't want all the hard, heavy rules that you sometimes associate with Dungeons and Dragons. We just wanted a fun game. And I will say, if you can get a copy of Tunnels and Trolls, pick it up just for the beautiful artwork by Liz Danforth. Liz did some beautiful stuff. And it is probably the second oldest tabletop fantasy RPG out there, if I'm remembering it right, because D&D came out in 74 and Tunnels and Trolls came out in 75.
Oh, okay.
And I just love it. I've backed them on Kickstarter. Unfortunately, they've had some of the great people who took part in that, just like great people who took part in D&D have died. Some of them have died. Ken St. Andre's still around, but they're just good people. One of the things that Tunnels and Trolls did, and they were really big on that, and they're still big on that, is they designed a lot of stuff for solitaire play. Which you couldn't do with D&D. You know, they were designing stuff for solitaire play before choose your own adventure books were being marketed.
Yeah.
So you could pick up Tunnels and Trolls and just play a solitaire game by yourself.
Yeah.
Which was really, really kind of cool.
Yeah.
And so I just recommend it for historical purposes, as well as just something goofy, fun, and light. I've never had a chance to play it because any convention I've been at that has a Tunnels and Trolls game, they always fill up. I've looked at their solitaire plays, and their solitaire play, I think some of that still holds up. Some of those adventures still hold up.
That's awesome.
So, yeah.
And then lastly, we have Big Eye Smallmouth. So, so other end of the spectrum, if you just want to play something just crazy anime, it can be anything. Big Eye Smallmouth is by far the best anime RPG. I mean, you've got things like we were talking about earlier with the Avatar one, which is going to be very specific to that, but it doesn't feel like an anime. If you play Big Eye Smallmouth, it feels like you're playing in an anime, and specifically to me, it always feels like you're playing in a 80s 90s anime. So if you want to play Project A-ko, superhero schoolgirls, or Sailor Moon, or you want
Goku.
Or you want to play Dragon Ball, you want to do Goku and all of them. You want to go do early Gundam, you could do that. Or if you want to go do Vampire Hunter D, you could do that. Fist of the North Star. So I mean, you can do any of those classics.
Vampire Hunter D gets no respect.
I love Vampire Hunter D.
Generation of anime fans.
Vampire Hunter D was what introduced Dumpiers, which is like ubiquitous now. Everybody knows about Dumpiers, but Vampire Hunter D was I think the first thing to introduce that. But you can play a Bubblegum Crisis. That's another really good one.
Didn't they come out with a Bubblegum Crisis?
They did. They did come out with one. Yeah. Well, all of these have had their own RPGs over the years. There was a Dragon Ball Z RPG. We played it in college, and it was ridiculous because here's why. Your basic Dragon Ball Z attack. What is Goku's standard signature attack? The Kamehameha, right? Right. Just the standard energy blast. Did 25 d6 damage.
Lord.
And if you wanted to, and that was at the beginning of the Dragon Ball Z saga. So once you get past like the Saiyan saga where he's like fighting with Vegeta and he suddenly needs to go fight Frieza, then your power, you have to power up. And so the Kamehameha was doing 100 D6.
Lord have mercy.
And the Spirit Bomb that he eventually learns to do does something like 250 D6 worth of damage. So there wasn't even a point in rolling this. Law of averages kicked in. So you could have just said it did X amount of damage, and that was it. And it was just so like scaling on it was ridiculous. So yes, all of these have had their own RPGs. They just were not, in my opinion, ever done well. But Big Eye Small Mouth solves that, and you can be as goofy with Big Eye Small Mouth as you want to. You can be as serious with Big Eye Small Mouth as you want to. There is room for all flavors of anime in that one.
I can believe it.
Yeah. So that's our list of some of the hidden gems from all of the genres. What did we miss? Are there other ones out there that we need to talk about that you think that weren't on our list but need to make the list? Let us know, and we'll go back and revisit those at some point. That is all that we've got for tonight. We're just coming in on an hour and a half, so we're going to wrap things up here. Any final questions or thoughts? We've got a couple people left in the chat, but I think most of them have dropped off at this point because this one went a little long. But we do want to say to everyone out there who's either listening after the fact or still hanging on with us, if you've got ideas for topics,
yes,
please let us know. We are looking for those. If there's anybody you'd like to see us talk to, drop those in a comment to us somewhere. We're looking for interview ideas as well. We're looking for lots.
We've got a couple of people that we're trying to line up for some interviews to excite you. Some people that we know through our history with the gaming community.
Yep.
So we want you to, if there's anybody you'd like us to reach out and interview, let us know. We want to try and get them on the stream and and if you know of any Grognards doing good, send them to us in our socials.
Yes.
We constantly search the web for stories about Grognards doing good, and Than is absolutely awesome about finding stuff. I'm not as good about it, but because I tend to just go to one or two sources for Grognard news. But if you know of anything that Grognards or gamers in general are doing good, we want to highlight that so that all our viewers know that gamers are doing amazing things in this world.
Yeah, absolutely. Rudolph and Willie both say, pretty thorough list. Great, guys. Thanks for the stream. Appreciate you guys, as always, for stopping by. It's always great to see you. I think that's going to do it for tonight. Any final thoughts, Derek?
As always, whether it is the dinner table, the gaming table, or the Lord's table, you're welcome at my table. Be good or be good at it.
And just be good to each other. We'll see you guys next time. Take care.
Take it easy, folks.